As you know, this is the fourth last Sunday in Advent, and that means it's the last installment of this little Advent series of sermons we've done that we based on that Do You Hear What I Hear folk song. It's been fun to hear that in different iterations through the last several weeks. At least I've certainly enjoyed them, and we've tried to use the lyrics from that traditional song as kind of the trajectory for the last 4 weeks of sermons. Do you hear what I hear? Do you see what I see? Listen to what I say. And then finally today, do you know what I know? And the question, I think, is one that is ancient, goes at least as far back as Isaiah. I think he's a good person to read in light of somebody who really believed that there was a certain understanding of the way God would be working to bring hope into the world, that if you know it, it'll change your life. And two articulations of that I want to read briefly today, Isaiah 35 and a section from Isaiah 40. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of God, the majesty of our Lord. Strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God, he will come with vengeance. With terrible recompense, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For the waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp, and the grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come into Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be on their heads, and they shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And then from the 40th chapter, have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. God does not faint or grow weary, and his understanding is unsearchable. God gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall away exhausted. But those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Grant, O Lord, that we might be the masters of ourselves to become the servants of others. Take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for thee. Amen. A little over a week ago now, I got a nice Christmas surprise when I wasn't expecting it. It was a week ago Saturday, the day of that big snowstorm. And by afternoon, the snowplow had still not made its way by my house. And so, with nowhere particular to go, I decided I would take the dog out for a walk in the snowstorm. And so Kate and I got out there, and we wound up pretty soon, even though it was snowing pretty hard, in Rolling Brook Park. That's near where my house is. It's just off of Hershey Road there. And there was not another soul in the park, as you might guess. And so even though I think it's technically a violation of a city ordinance, I took Kate's collar and leash off, and I just sent her off romping across the snowfield. I maintain that watching a dog run off leash on a snowy day is a spiritual experience. It is good for the soul to see such exuberance displayed. She would bound through, as dogs love to do, roll in the snow, stick her whole head into a drift, to smell something interesting there. If you want a lesson in living with gusto and exuberance, if you want a little spiritual uplift, take your dog off leash once in a while and just sit back and watch, and you'll get a lesson. But anyway, that aside, one result of letting Kate loose was she kind of led us back to a remote corner of the park where I don't usually go. If you know the park, I'm talking about the kind of northeast corner that's north of the tennis courts, and that's where we came across our delightful Christmas surprise. The surprise was in the form of a spindly little maple tree. I didn't even know the tree was there, but you wouldn't particularly notice it. It's about maybe 7 feet high. And of course, in December, there's no leaves on a maple tree. It's just a little spindly, sticky maple tree. And some good soul, for some reason unknown to me, had gotten out there on that snowy day. You could see a series of tracks in the circle around the tree. They had decorated that for Christmas. They had wrapped that spindly tree, those little limbs, with yellow and red garland, and they had hung red glass balls from the empty branches, no vegetation on them at all, and capped the whole thing off with just a little plastic angel at the very top. I have no idea who would go to such trouble, though I do remember I came across a similarly decorated tree in a public space some years ago. This one was a little evergreen that somebody had decorated kind of spontaneously like that on the bike, just off the bike path on around the lake there at State Farm South, the corporate South. If you know that path, there was somebody who had done. I think maybe we have a serial Christmas tree decorator that lives in our neighborhood, which is a good thing to have. If you're going to have a serial something, a serial decorator is a good thing, I think. But anyway, they'd struck again. This proud little maple, kind of standing bravely adorned in the midst of a gray and snowy day, as if to say, never give up, keep your head up, because you never know when you're going to be surprised with some goodness at a place you weren't looking to find it. And Kate and I have been back to that tree a couple of times just to see if it's still holding up, and it is. And I've taken to calling it my Isaiah tree, because that brave, hopeful, keep your eyes lifted up sentiment is exactly the sentiment that Isaiah tried so hard in those middle chapters to cultivate in the Israelites. And that's who he's addressing, of course, in those readings today. The middle chapters of Isaiah were written at a time when the Jews were anything but hopeful. They were in exile in Babylon, and they were depressed as a culture. They had been enslaved for years, long enough that many of them were fearing that they would never get home. They would die as captives in a foreign land. And that's the context that Isaiah writes in those middle chapters. And when he writes those famous words about those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. Don't give up yet. You'll mount up with wings like eagles. You'll walk and not faint. Have you not known that's true, he says. Or in a similar vein, just a few chapters earlier, the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall bloom and rejoice like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly. All of that, of course, is to say that when you're deepest and farthest out in the desert, what you need to know is that because of who God is, you're never stuck. You're never completely sunk. And there is the possibility always, because of God's nature, for something to bloom where a bloom looks impossible. Martin Luther King Jr., in the depths of the struggle for civil rights in the 1960s, used to try to reassure faithful marchers who wondered if they were doing any good at all by saying to them, "Don't forget that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends toward justice." I mean, that's Similar to what Isaiah is trying to get across when he writes to the exiles. Have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the one who gives power, even when you think there is no power left for you to get. Those who wait on God will throw off the exhaustion of their circumstances, and they will run and not run like my dog Kate. I picture that, you know how dogs run with that kind of open mouth grin on their faces? They just kind of see it with delight. They'll run and not be weary. They'll walk and not faint. You can move toward a future you can't fully comprehend, but that you can fully trust because of who God is. And we Methodists have a word for that kind of hopeful living. Living with the idea that good things can happen sometimes when you don't expect it, or when you aren't looking for it, or when you haven't earned it. There is a term for this. John Wesley, our founder, loved to talk about it. He called it prevenient grace. Prevenient means going before. The goodness that goes before you and is out there, not because we've earned it, but just because of who God is. It's the goodness that's out there in your future that God has going to use to bring goodness and wholeness and blooms when you're not even looking for it, when you're utterly unaware that God's even at work. Maybe the most famous Bible story about prevenient grace, at least the one that illustrates it most clearly in my mind, is not a Christmas story, but it's an Easter story, the story of Jesus walking with the followers on the Emmaus Road. Do you remember that story, Luke 24? It's a story in my mind about prevenient grace. It's the evening of Easter Day, and there's these depressed followers who haven't yet understood the resurrection. They think, Good Friday was the last word, and they are making their way sadly and mournfully out of town, walking to Emmaus, and lo and behold, grace in the form of the risen Christ comes and walks with them, and they don't know it. It's, he just is with them and listens patiently and talks with them and walks. And all of a sudden, it's like the bloom in the desert. They recognize who it is, and their life is transformed. Wesley said, that's what prevenient grace is like. God walking with us and opening a new window, so to speak, even when we had no capacity to see it ourselves, or when we weren't even thinking about God doing that, or certainly not because we've earned it. And I'd go so far as to say that in a sense, that kind of unearned, prevenient grace is really the hallmark that distinguishes Christianity from all other religions. But that's a conclusion not just from me, but it was written, I think, very eloquently some years ago by a theologian from England. His name was Hugh Montefiore. Hugh Montefiore was a New Testament scholar and for a time was a bishop in the Church of England. He was the Bishop of Birmingham. And late in his life, he wrote what I think has kind of become a classic book entitled Credible Christianity. And among the many smart things he says in that book is that there are some things in the great faiths of the world, the major religions, which are held in common. And then there is one thing in the Christian faith that is unique. Among the commonalities of all great religions, Montefiore wrote, is the fact that all great faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of the great faiths recognize that it's a part of our human condition to want very much to bridge the gap between the human and the divine in life. It's our basic longing as a people. All great faiths take that, to try to close the gap between where we are and where God is. All great religions postulate God as holy and infinite in his capacity to love and care for the world, and humans are not holy, and we are not infinite in how caring we are, quite the opposite. And that means that there's always this separation in the relationship that somehow needs to be dealt with. It's this gap between God's holy realm and our secular, profane realm, if you will. How do we close that gap? And it's the task of religion, Montefiore said, to mediate that, to close the distance, to somehow move us closer to God. That's what religion's about. Though the way you climb the ladder The way you close the bridge is different in all faiths. Some faiths teach that you climb closer to God by relating through a priest of some kind who has some special insight or special access to God's ear and can kind of mediate the process. And you can move up the ladder through your relationship with some special holy person. Other faiths teach that you climb through certain spiritual practices. You know, you follow a particular form of meditation or a path to enlightenment, or you get more centered and self-aware and less striving for things. And in that way, through enlightenment, you climb the ladder. You get closer to God. There are still other faiths that teach that the ladder is climbed by keeping the rules, being scrupulous in following the religious laws, whether they be laws about purity or offerings or pilgrimages to holy places or praying several times a day, facing just the right direction. The closer you are to practicing these things, it kind of gets you up the ladder and closes the gap between where God is and where we are. Whatever the practice, those may vary. It's the job of religion, Montefiore says, to get you closer, to move you up the ladder. But in Christianity, the proclamation is just the opposite. Christianity is the only faith that has the audacity to say, we can't do it. We can't climb the ladder. There's no possible way. We can't find our way to God on our own. We can't, by our own morality or by cultivating certain spiritual practices, good as those things are, those don't move us nearly high enough. The scandal of Christianity is that we can't climb at all, but that's okay. Life can still be good, and you can still have a connection to God because God climbs down. That's the good news of Christmas, of course. God chooses to bridge the gap, to take the initiative, and move down to us, humble himself, and bridge that gap. All we have to do, Montefiore said, and a chorus of other thoughtful people have said it before him, all we have to do is quit striving and recognize the gift that we're receiving. Accept it for the gift it is, and then let that gift, the obvious gift of love, that awareness changes as people. That's what we believe, that when you are loved and when you understand how loved you are in that unconditional, wholehearted way, it will change you. When you're loved, it can change even your physical appearance. And I see that all the time. One of the great joys of my job is I get to stand right there many Saturdays a year, and I watch brides come down the aisle at their wedding. And if you don't believe that love can change your appearance, I will tell you, you should stand where I stand and see this, because it is so wonderful. The groomsmen and the groom and I, we come out, and the groom, he's anxious and nervous, and we stand there, and those doors open, and the bride comes down, and everybody stands up, So here's this groom who loves her, looking right at her in the face. All these people who love her, standing up, looking right at her as she comes down. There's like an aura. I believe in auras. I've seen them. They glow. There is a radiance to all of that. And then, it's the greatest job in the world. They get here and we start this ceremony and we talk about the nature of love. And not to play this analogy too far, but once what they then go do, they come up here to give their vows. Basically, they say, we know how loved we are, and we know that we can be different because we can wholeheartedly give ourselves to love. They give their vows to each other. And what's beautiful about the vows is that in the traditional wedding vows, you only say what you're going to give in response to the love that you have felt. It's not a contractual kind of language. You don't say, I'm going to do this for you, and in response, I expect you to do this for me. All you give in the vow is how you're going to be different. You're going to give wholeheartedly to this in light of the love you've received. I will love you for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, till death do we part. And the point is simply that when you know you're loved, you can give yourself in a whole other way to relationship and to life. And in response, you love not because you're obligated to, but because it's your deepest joy. That's really what love is all about. You love now because it's what pleases you, to please this other person who is the one who has loved you unconditionally. Same with the relationship with God, it seems to me. The more and more we get connected to God in recognizing Him drawing near, the more in harmony we are with His will as we live day by day. And now it's 3 more days until we celebrate this great act of prevenient grace. God bowing down, stepping down on that ladder rung by rung to bring the world and us in harmony with Him. Are you ready for that? That's a big thing. I mean, what could be bigger in this world? Carl Menninger, the famous psychiatrist, the founder of the Menninger Clinic out in Topeka, once said that it is the mark of a mature soul when you see somebody living a loving life, not because they think they're going to be paid back in this life, but simply out of the desire to live as a great soul, the soul God means them to be. And at Christmas time one year, Menninger penned a wonderful little poem, a meditation that I've kept in my file for years, and I don't know a better way to close than to share it with you now. In response to God's love, how do you live in the world? He wrote this: well, people will be unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you are successful, you will win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Honesty and frankness will make you vulnerable in this world. Be honest and frank anyway. People favor underdogs but follow only the top dogs. Fight for some underdogs anyway. What you spend years building up may be destroyed overnight by some careless person who comes after you. Build up anyway. Give the world the best you've got, and you'll likely get a punch in the mouth. Give the world the best you've got anyway. Now, we're just 3 days from Christmas, the day that God gave the world the best He's got. May we receive that gift joyfully, and may we stand bravely with our heads up, like that little maple tree my dog found in the park, that we all might shine forth with the brightness of Christmas.